Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I realize I've been completely absent here for like a month, but you know, I got food poisoning, and then I moved, and then I got into a car wreck, so there's been a lot going on. But I'm back with this episode of Your Favorite X-Men, the podcast I do here where I talk to somebody about their favorite X-Men character and why that character is so important to them. And today I'm joined by Michael, who is the Daily Illyana on Twitter, that is at Stepping Discs, but I'll have that information in the description of this video. Now, usually there's a brief lead up to revealing who the favorite X-Men character for the episode is, but I think it's probably fairly obvious here. Thank you for joining me, Michael, and would you do us the, at this point, purely performative honor of revealing who your favorite X-Men character is?
Well, it's certainly no surprise. I am a Magik fan. Daily Illyana probably is the big giveaway.
Yeah, Stepping Discs might be a little more obscure for those who aren't really familiar with Illyana or her power set, but you're still kind of a dead giveaway with the Daily Illyana. But just to reverse engineer a little bit, can you give us your background for how you got into comic books, how you got into X-Men comics, and then why Illyana was a character you were drawn to and one that resonated with you?
Absolutely. So I started reading comics, I recall, around 1977. Uncanny X-Men 103 actually stands out as one of the first comics I ever read. I still remember it very well. And that would be first Black Tom Cassidy and Juggernaut team up. And they just stood out as like these weird characters because I was probably, I think, around 9, and Spider-Man, Hulk, those were the characters, I probably was most familiar with. But seeing Nightcrawler and Colossus and Wolverine, Storm, there was something different about them. I didn't know who they were, but it stuck out. And I would occasionally pick up more X-Men, and to the point where it became my favorite book. Now, I can't tell you when that happened, but it was the only comic book I ended up subscribing to. And my first issue I got in the mail was X-Men 135, which is right towards the end of the Dark Phoenix saga. And that's kind of where I was.
Yeah, that is the issue where Jean Grey's got like the crazy cover and her Dark Phoenix outfit going, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, that was the first one. And again, sticks in my head. I don't know why, and I had no idea really how important Jean Grey was at the time. I was still a kid. Her death in 137 didn't really resonate with me, but seemed like an interesting story. And I just continued to read X-Men, and then eventually New Mutants. I picked up the early New Mutants. They didn't do much for me, but it was the Sienkiewicz with the Demon Bear.
Oh yeah, that stuff's really good and crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of when it caught my attention, and so I started reading it. That's kind of when I became an Illyana fan. And not to drag this out, but when they took her out of circulation, basically at the end of Inferno, and she was de-aged, it was around the time when I started dropping out of comics. I didn't quite fully drop out, but by the early 90s, I'd stopped, partly because of where I was in my life, but having my favorite character gone, it didn't really resonate.
Of course.
And I was gone for a long time. I just really came back in about 2019.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've had a lot of catching up to do.
So that's interesting because I had started reading X-Men only like 2 years ago as a kind of pandemic project. Now, I've been reading Marvel Comics since I was like 13, and I'm 24 now. But to me, and maybe you'll notice this too, having been an older comic book reader and, catching up now, the X-Men are a part of Marvel, of course, but in a way they also feel very separate from everything else going on in Marvel. So I was even a blank slate to some of the newer characters who had been introduced in like the past 2 decades.
Yeah, we have that in common. There was definitely it's been a pretty steep learning curve for me. I'm certainly familiar with the original 5 and the new generation, the Storm group, and of course the New Mutants. But after that, it's been all fresh stuff.
I'm kind of curious now because I started with the new X-Men omnibus by Grant Morrison, started with that run, then did Astonishing and some other stuff, but what really, really got me hooked and so addicted to X-Men was the current Krakoa era stuff and House of X, Power of X. Now I'm wondering if that was the case for you as well, or
I'm calling it dumb luck. I got back into this is I don't know if this is a very common, be weird, but it was the New Mutants movie that caught my attention. It was, and I hadn't seen it yet, but the advertisement and seeing Magik in it, and I was like, whoa. I can't believe they're doing a movie with this character. So I started just actually watching YouTube videos and then finding out that, oh, she's alive. I had no idea. I thought she was gone. I didn't know she was back. And she'd been back for quite a while. And then that's started getting me back into the comics. And I think I was just fortunate enough to be back in this Krakoa era because I think the stories since the Claremont time, which I was reading, And now we're hit or miss. I mean, I've heard over and over about the Grant Morrison is a really good one, and then there's a lot of down years. I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't caught up with all of that yet. It's just dumb luck that I happened to stumble into the Krakoa era, and I'm absolutely thrilled and loving it.
Yeah, see, I feel very lucky in a way too because I'm catching up on the decades of X-Men comics that I've missed. So, like that very classic Claremont stuff and more. But I'm also getting the modern stuff that's coming out today, and I feel like that enhances my reading, having read both so close to each other. Because I think I catch a lot more references that way to classic source material, and I catch interesting characterizations throughout the years and stuff like that. And I have read furiously, might I add, in the past 2 years, so my head is probably way too full of random X-Men knowledge, which is probably something you could say as well.
Yeah, it's my return has been very Magic centric. The starting of the Twitter page was just kind of like a passion thing. Like, why the heck not? I just want to start talking about this character. So I've kind of been relearning the X-Men over the last 25 years through a lens of Illyana and my understanding of the characters through her. So I still got a lot of growing to do as far as learning about the last 25 years that I've missed, because I've really focused on all the stories that I missed for her from 2007 when she was coming back, right up through the Zeb Wells run and then the Bendis run and everything since then.
So when Magik is actually put out of commission after Inferno, do you know, you said she came back in only 2007 then? Was she used at all in that intermediate period?
She was sporadically used. She would be brought back for like alternative Earths, I guess, maybe.
Oh, like House of M, like when she appeared there as a shield agent?
Yeah, that sort of things. Right. So she was never really brought back as a permanent character, always just a plot thread for some particular story they're trying to work on. She was gone a long time, and I to this day I'm stunned. I'm like, why? And I feel like the Marvel must have kicked themselves because she has grown in such popularity. Like, wow, we lost 14 years.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had any editorial insight on why that happened, because something I've noticed as a fan getting into the X-Men, when people say their favorite X-Men characters when they're making those lists, Magik is a very, very popular character. She is usually on those lists. So it's a little shocking that she was gone for so long.
And then, finding out that Louis Simonson left the door open, and just for some reason, no one ever decided to go there. So, just one of those strange things that happened. And however, I'm certainly glad she's back and thriving.
Yeah, and I will say, so she's one of my favorite characters as well. And the way I sort of got into her was I picked up the New Mutants omnibus sort of on a chance because I saw it was mutants and I saw it was Claremont. And, I wasn't extremely as into X-Men yet like I am now, but I was certainly getting there as I was reading through Claremont's classic run. But, I thought I might like it because, well, Claremont, and it was the second Mansion team, the second Mansion class. So basically, once Magik got involved there, everything just really, really clicked with me. And Magik's 4-issue limited series in there is one of my favorite comic book series of all time. It's as equally metal as it is poignant, and it's her origin story and one of your recommendations. So I have to assume that you're also a big fan of that one.
Oh, absolutely. And, the interesting thing is, kind of rediscovering her and reading that back again so long, it's been so many years. It's messed up. I cannot believe the things Claremont was putting a child through. It's like you said, metal. It's intense. Like, wow, this is crazy, but truly, definitely I think pretty daring. And it's speechless. It's her story now it didn't really hit me as hard back in the day as it does now, probably because I'm a dad. But I mean, it truly can bring tears to my eyes sometimes. Just the brutal things that this person had to endure. It was, in fact,
Yeah, and that was something that stuck out to me the first time I read it too. It's like you said, it was pretty daring in comparison to some of the previous stuff Claremont had done at the time. And I don't know, it was just this intense trauma story about prevailing over your abuser despite the pain and grooming and all that. And it's kind of interesting in a way what they planned with Illyana, because I remember in Giant Size X-Men #1, I think one of the reasons Colossus, her brother, for those who don't know, wanted to leave Russia and join the X-Men was to maybe create a future pathway for Illyana to come over to America, just in case she also had mutant powers that manifested. He didn't want her to end up as a weapon for the state. He wanted her to come somewhere where she could be herself and learn, like at the Xavier Institute. So it's just interesting that we've seen her from a child, and we've seen every bad thing that's happened to her over her lifespan, and we get it in a very expedited
expedited way in this miniseries with all the abuse and trauma.
Yeah, it's really interesting is how many people initially didn't see the depth of the abuse. Obviously, because they can't be graphic in comics, but certainly subtextually, there was some pretty severe stuff going on. And I think it was a Louis Simonson in her run on New Mutants. I think it's issue 71 where we get to see Sim beating her and then dragging her away, and where Illyana is like telling Rain, "Look, you don't want to see this because what's coming is really awful." It's just it's heavy. It's real heavy, and I think it's such a key to understanding her as a character is just to know the horror, the absolute horror that this child had to deal with. And she had to feel abandoned as well. So like all she knew is she'd been kidnapped, and for her it was 7 years. And where were her rescuers? Where was her brother? No one was there to capture her, so or help her. On top of everything else, she must have felt abandoned, and that must add some layers to this person when she comes back and why she might be so guarded and so I don't know what the words would be, but it breaks my heart. So it's hard for me to talk about it. It's really pretty awful stuff.
Yeah, it is. And something I thought that was a really interesting choice to sort of emphasize that issue of abandonment, maybe, was the alternate version of the X-Men that they had in the story. Because again, maybe my details aren't 100%, but if I remember correctly, that alternate version of the X-Men that came there right before from another dimension, because, that happened because Limbo is a weird place with time and space, but that version did end up saving their version of Illyana, who got stuck there, right?
Yeah,
They got stuck there, but they saved their Illyana, I think.
Yep, correct.
And then each of them sort of, well, it was either get killed or get corrupted, or I guess Storm was like the best case scenario, that alternate version of Storm, where she was under the tutelage of Belasco for a time and then broke away from it, but still part of her soul was sort of permanently messed up there.
Yeah, and today's New Mutants, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them.
No, I haven't, but as a member of X Twitter, I've seen like everybody raving about it already, because if I understand correctly, they actually, today in the issue, they addressed some of Illyana's previous trauma, right?
Yeah, to actually say the words that she is suffering from PTSD, it's for me a refreshing thing to see, because for so long I feel like I've been, along with other fans, saying, look, this is not an evil person. This is a person suffering from PTSD who went through a horrible trauma. Yes, she may have made some bad choices regarding her relationships here or there, but ultimately this is a hurting human being. And it was good to see a comic book acknowledge that she's not evil. She's actually just a person suffering from PTSD.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to Illyana's characterization that I've seen, would you say that like sometimes it seems like she's putting up a wall to try and maybe guard herself from those feelings or something like that? Because I think she is like naturally a badass, but she does give off that kind of bravado attitude sometimes that seems like she's kind of, got something internal that's she's holding back.
Oh, completely. Absolutely. 100%. She's got a wall up. She's very guarded with her emotions because of what happened to her, and really only is opened up to probably Kitty Pryde, her brother, and maybe Danny Moonstar. I mean, she's been pretty guarded throughout her life.
I also thought, and this was when I was originally reading that Claremont New Mutants run, I thought it was really interesting getting her to join that New Mutants team because she brought such like a different attitude and vibe to it because of all the tragedy that she carries with her. And not that the others don't have tragic lives themselves, but because they do. But hers felt very different. And I always say, and I think I say it in every episode now at this point, that the X-Men can kind of be like a trauma Olympics sometimes because, I mean, I guess it's just comic books, but bad things happen to these characters over and over again. And as the audience, I guess that's kind of our fault because, it's the nature of storytelling that we like to see them prevail over their hardships. But when Illyana joins that New Mutants team, and I think she even has dialogue that indicates as such, but she is just such an outsider, and it is like very weird for her because she doesn't let on how long she's actually been in limbo, right?
Right. Yeah, people have no idea.
And especially not the details of like what specifically happened there, because I remember that being a big plot point between her and Colossus, since he always viewed her as the innocent kid sister, his little snowflake as he called her, and she didn't want to disillusion him with that about what she had kind of become.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And the things she was forced to do, things that happened to her. And I think, that you said she's an outsider. That's probably what appealed to me, that this person was an outsider. I think probably a lot of kids probably felt that way in their lives. That's not an abnormal thing for kids to feel. And I think that's probably why she resonated so much for me, is this outsider this person they don't feel like they belong. If that's probably, I'm gonna guess why I, as a teenager at the time, probably really was drawn to her.
I think she's a great symbol for that mutant metaphor of otherness, totally. And actually, have you read the Firestar miniseries by Tom DeFalco?
I bet you back in the '80s I did, but it's been a long time.
Well, like I said, I've been reading a lot of this stuff recently because it's been fun to take like a kind of analytical look and do a deep dive into these stories. And to me, that Magik miniseries captured the otherness metaphor and the trauma and the grooming situation very, very well and in a very nuanced way. And I still like the Firestar miniseries by Tom DeFalco. But to me, it seemed like that miniseries was trying to do what the Magik miniseries did, but just not quite as well. And I'm not trying to rag on the Firestar miniseries because I still do really like it and I still appreciate it for what it is. But I just think there's an interesting comparison there if you do ever want to go read that one.
Yeah, I definitely will. The other part of her trauma is coming back from this situation of, like you mentioned, not wanting to really tell her brother about what she went through, and not really feeling like she can open up and talk to anybody. But there's a particular issue. I think it's a New Mutants one where Professor Xavier basically says, I mean, it's right. She's fresh from limbo, that he doesn't want to deal with her trauma. He doesn't want to deal with it. He was going to pass it off. It's certainly an indictment against Xavier. Another check marked as of why he maybe wasn't such a great teacher, but kind of rediscovering that when I'm looking back, it's like, wow, she never had a chance. The one person that was given the responsibility said, no, it's not, I'm not going to deal with this. And so she's left on her own. And essentially, I think Kitty Pryde is left as the only person and Danny to some degree, but as the only person she can rely on.
Yeah, and not to turn it into the attack of Charles Xavier, but I gotta say, in that New Mutants run in general, his mentorship at times is pretty morally dubious. I mean, for example, when Amara Magma joins the team, she doesn't want him reading her thoughts, and he reads her thoughts. And then with Rain Sinclair, same thing. She doesn't want him reading her thoughts, and he reads her thoughts, and they're very vulnerable and sad thoughts because she's also a very traumatized character. But he cannot read Magik's thoughts, though. That's part of it too, right?
Correct.
So I guess he just doesn't want to do any heavy lifting there at all.
That's a great observation. I never really thought of it that way. Without if he can't read the thoughts, that's too much work. I'd never looked at it that way. That's really good.
Yeah. In regards to relationships, though, I do like the friendship she has with Kitty, which I guess she had with Kitty before and after Limbo, actually. But I don't recall where she shared more details about what actually happened in Limbo with Kitty. At least I don't think it's in that original New Mutants run that I read. So is that somewhere else, or where does that happen?
The only place I think is really shown is Uncanny 171, which is when Rogue joins the X-Men. I think they're doing some kind of simulation in the Danger Room, and for some reason, Illyana, I think, was running the simulation and made it look like Limbo or something to that effect, and that triggered a response in her where she actually pulls her soul sword for the first time. I think it's the first time shown in comics. She attacks Kitty, and it's an image that I've shared many times where Illyana is kind of in a fetal position and Kitty's holding her, and Illyana says, I remembered. And it's like the first time she's having to deal with everything that happened. And everyone's kind of like confused, like, what is going on? And Kitty's just like, we'll be fine, just leave us alone. So I'm going to assume, because it's never shown, that at some point they must have at least talked a little bit about what happened there.
And moments like those are sort of what I'm saying when I say I feel lucky that I'm getting to read some of that older stuff and new stuff as well, sort of in the same timeline. Because it's like you said, today they brought up the idea of her having PTSD and having been dealing with it, and that scene you painted is probably a good example of how it had manifested itself before.
Yeah, and I think there's a very famous scene, I think it's New Mutants 14, where Illyana is walking away from the other students, and they're all kind of saying things under their breath about she's weird and they don't like her, and she kind of does like a little monologue about the one person who accepts her as she is Kitty, and doesn't judge her. So again, there must be it's subtextual. She's not explicitly saying, hey, I told Kitty everything, but the fact that Kitty's accepting her as she is and isn't treating her in as the way the others seem to. So I think there's always this suggestion that Kitty must know more. Kitty is the emotional, rock for Illyana during those years.
And this actually brings up an interesting point of Magik and Kitty discourse, since we're talking about that relationship. And personally, I do think that there have been writers and moments where that relationship has been queer coded, and there's been things that might imply that there is, some flirting between those two. They may have had some sort of past, more intimate relationship. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on, the whole Kitty and Magik relationship dynamic that some people talk about and some people say that they want to see more in the comic books. Like I said, I think there is evidence to support it, but that's purely my own interpretation of the books.
I go with the queer coding. I see them as having had a relationship, certainly at one point. I think it's there. It's interesting. There was one of the, I think more, I don't want to say their name because I don't have any permission, but they were on a guest of a different podcast, and they were not convinced of the Kitty Illyana relationship until they read the comics. And then their response was, "Oh, those girls are gay." Yeah, I think it's there, again, in my opinion, but I certainly respect other people's opinions. I'm not going to, as I try to be good about that, as like not tell other people that their point of view was wrong. But I see it as there's definitely something there, and I'm always hopeful that Marvel will make it canon.
Well, I feel like unfortunately we don't see them interact that much on Krakoa nowadays.
No, only Marauders 12 is the only time that I specifically can think of, and Jerry Dugan certainly left some. There was some subtextual stuff there, the Marauders number 12 issue. And I kind of broke it down once in a little thread about the different times they were together. But yeah, so that's the only time I think they've been together. Marauders number 12 is when it was Kitty's return from the dead.
And speaking of the Krakoa era, this all makes me a little curious about what you think of Magik during the Krakoa era and, her as a war captain and sort of how far she has come since you started reading.
Well, I'll start with that last part, is how far she's come. I'm definitely going to credit the writing of Brian Michael Bendis, as, obviously he made her a very prominent character in his X-Men, but some of the things that he did, I think you could point to as really critical to helping Illyana be able to become the person she is now. If I can certainly compare it to, say, the Claremont years. So with Claremont, I talked about how Xavier basically gave up on helping her from the very beginning, leaving her more or less on her own with the help of her couple friends, Kitty and Danny. And so the fact that she ends up having to sacrifice herself, basically she couldn't fight off the dark part. It was unresolved trauma. It's this person, that stuff just eventually surfaced. And I think metaphorically, we could say the dark child, and she ends up having to sacrifice herself. I think you could read some stuff into that as having some deeper meaning. But then with Bendis, she had mentors. First was Scott, and Emma, and then she turns to Doctor Strange. So she has these adults who are helping her, or who can help her process the trauma that she never had the chance to. And I think you could point to as why she is able to. I've often said in my Twitter account that I see the dark child somewhat as a metaphor for her pain. We saw it a lot more when she was a New Mutant in the 80s. We see it less since Bendis because she's processed her trauma. She's not fully, you never do. You can't go through what she went through and be all good, but she's had a lot more help. And I think she's a much more centered, I think, person than she certainly was. So the war captain, I think, is a great job. I think I love that she's in a leadership position. I wish Danny was in a leadership position. I think that's overdue. I'm hoping they'll rectify that. And I like the place that she's in. I think she's a teacher. She's obviously a war captain. She's, I think, held in high regard within the mutant community. So I'm really enjoying the place that she has right now.
I can really appreciate that with her character too, like what you said, that high regard that she is held in. Because something I like to see with my favorite characters in this era is how they are contributing and giving back to the mutant community, and how they're sort of keeping this new dream and this radical paradigm shift for mutant kind alive. And Magik, I mean, anytime I see her, she is pulling her weight. That's not even just in the Krakoa era, just anytime I see her. She's definitely like a heavy hitter in a few different areas. And I mean, her teleportation itself is super, super useful. And I recall, because for the Jean Grey episode I did here, we read some of Bendis' all-new X-Men, and that's when Magik is on the team with Cyclops and Emma, and they're being like real mutant radicals, and she's just helping them out so much there. She's teleporting them in and out of trouble, and I couldn't help but think they would have been royally screwed without her there.
Yeah, it's absolutely 100%. I found it amusing a bit that the current X-Men team, like, I know they were elected but they wouldn't have a teleporter. What a benefit that is to have on your team. And it doesn't have to be Magic. There are other teleporters, but the current team has to take an airplane. I mean, yes, if often they I don't they call it the Lockheed. I don't know if they call it the Thunderbird. Maybe. How convenient it is to have a teleporter, especially when you're in danger. You need to get the heck out of there.
Yeah, yeah, really. And I always do want to define powers a little bit here, or try to at least. And since you are at Stepping Discs, I wanted to ask you about her teleportation powers, because I know they manifested themselves in Limbo, and they were a little shaky at first. But so is it that they can actually teleport through space and time?
Yeah, yes. So that's one of the great aspects, I think, of her powers, the fact that she can go through space and time. I think during Claremont, he made her ability to control it very limited, and to the point that they would often walk or take a cab as opposed to risking where her teleportation might take them.
Oh, that's right. Because yeah, I remember when Kitty is kidnapped by Emma Frost and is at the Massachusetts Academy, and Emma Frost is like trying to induct her into the Hellions. Magik, that's when she joined the team, doesn't want to use her powers, or they don't want to use them because there's a risk that like they might jump too far forward in time and it might be too late or something like that.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And that she seems to have overcome that now, because she's regularly teleporting people wherever they need to go. I mean, Cable 11, she brought him to a different dimension. There was a Wolverine's thing where she teleported Wolverine to Mars, and doesn't think twice about it. But yeah, her teleportation is pretty cool, especially. I really enjoy a lot of the ways the writers have used it. And it's not just a form of transportation, which is certainly what it's mostly used for, but as a weapon as well, teleporting Dark Beast into his head into the ceiling, or if say like someone is attacking, she'll put up a stepping disc, and one in front of the person and one behind them. So basically they're attacking themselves, like shooting themselves. Or it was a dragon who was breathing fire, and she had the stepping disc basically redirect the fire onto the dragon. So it's been a pretty cool use of her power.
Yeah, it's been really fun, I think, to see how these characters have kind of evolved with their power sets over the year, or how they've become more accustomed and more skilled with them, like Magik has. And I think another good example that is Magik adjacent, and we mentioned her in this conversation, is like Kitty Pryde. I mean, just looking back at how she used to be depicted, I mean, she was always very, very cool and very much a badass. But her combat in like Marauders #1 is so awesome, and she's like using her martial arts knowledge with her phasing powers, and you just get the sense that she has really gotten the hang of her powers and how to use it in an offensive and defensive way.
Yeah, that really made me appreciate her. When I first read that, my jaw dropped. I was like, wow. I said out loud, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe some of the things she was doing is really cool.
Which is really funny too, because a lot of times I've seen discourse that people think Kitty is a more docile character, which I know this isn't a Kitty episode, but Kitty is not like that at all, really. Kitty always like stands up for what's right, and Kitty always is willing to get into a fight. I mean, she's not always willing to kill, but I mean, not all the great X-Men characters are like that. I mean, Storm, at least for what I've read and for the longest time, was like no killing. So, Kitty's awesome, guys.
Oh, she is, absolutely. And I'm going to confess, until I saw that Marauders issue, I was not aware of what she was capable of, and that definitely made me appreciate her quite a bit.
Yeah, she has had like a lot of awesome moments over the years. But anyway, back to Illyana, and sort of on the subject of defining her powers. So, Soul Sword, is it just the case that, it is the dark magic with the still innocent part of her soul combined that creates sort of this manifestation of her soul, and thus the Soul Sword? Or what exactly, is the deal behind the Soul Sword? I feel like I was always kind of confused on that.
It's funny that I had never seen it as an instrument of dark magic until again, it was another podcast mentioning it that way. I always just viewed it as her, like a triumphant thing, that she was she couldn't certainly create. She wasn't a creation person like Storm was, but it was a way for her to save herself. So it's funny. I never perceived it in any way as a dark thing. I saw it as a heroic thing. Like this person, they were able to take what they had left of their life force, or of their soul, and create something to free themselves from this awful situation. And I can understand why it would be. It's very confusing on the way because initially it was just a weapon that could only hurt magical beings, but it seemed to have expanded now to having a physical impact on anybody. I mean, or is the and I'm gonna be confess. I sometimes am confused by what necessarily is happening. Like when she beheaded Sabretooth, and it's like, well, was that a regular sword or was that her soul sword? I didn't realize she could do that. Yeah, so it's been a bit. I think clearly, I don't know. The writers have kind of sent some mixed signals over the last decade about what the capabilities of the soul sword are, and I'm not going to say that I necessarily know the answers because it really hasn't been revealed.
Yeah, you know what? I've not heard it before, but I do actually really like that interpretation of it sort of as a thing of triumph and a manifestation of her, beating the darker upbringings that are within her. I do really, really like that interpretation.
It was another thing that was mentioned today was that, and so I'm sorry for spoiling if I spoil, but that just Magic said that magic is not, there's no, magic is not evil. The, it's kind of like a weapon. It's intent. And that's something I've kind of thought about. It's like, dark magic versus white magic. And is it not just the intent? Was Aurora teaching Illyana white magic and Belasco teaching her dark magic? Perhaps it's just magic, but Belasco's intent was evil versus Aurora's. So the magic itself was neutral. It was the intent of the instructor or of the user.
That is an interesting way to look at it, and what I sort of think of when you say that though is because, well, I'm reading through Mutant Massacre right now, and when all the Morlocks are taking refuge at the mansion and they're hurt and everyone's doing what they can, Magik, again taking great initiative like she always does, she seeks out Moira so that Moira can come back and help heal some of these mutants, and so Magik teleports into Moira's bathroom as Moira is taking a shower. Then she pulls her out of the shower, she teleports her, or at least tries to teleport her back to the mansion, but they get stuck in limbo for a brief moment, and Moira, because she was showering, is naked. So Magik uses some magic to give Moira clothes, but the clothes are very like punk metal style. That's the way they manifest themselves. And Magik says something like, "Oh, sorry, that's just how my magic comes out sometimes, whether it is intentional or not, and that's the form it takes because of where she came from or how she learned it or something like that."
Yeah, I think I perceive magic as just having that this self hatred, and often so anytime she's referring to herself, so often I think just talking in a negative way. I think that's self hatred coming through often. Again, I choose to not see her as evil. Again, in any way, shape, or form. That's again, this is a choice as a reader. I choose to see her as having a lot of self hatred, a lot of negative thoughts. Obviously, someone suffering from PTSD, and I've mentioned earlier that I view the dark child as a physical manifestation of her pain because it had to go somewhere. She endured so much, and again, what I'm saying is not canon, it's just head canon. But for me, it makes sense. Why? Because one of the questions, why does the dark child look different? Why does it always look the same? Why is she less of a dark child now? And for me, it just makes sense that that's what it is. It's that pain kind of coming through. She's a very, very powerful being, very extremely powerful. So,
Yeah, and I might be speaking broadly here, but my assumption is that most readers are not seeing Magik as an evil character. I mean, maybe it's a similar situation to Wolverine, where sometimes like he slips and goes into animal berserker mode. Sometimes maybe when she's at her lowest, she can slip and it can become a little more, her trauma sort of comes out a little bit. But like Wolverine and like her, I feel like there are two characters who are always, putting their family first. And when I say family, really, I mean like the entirety of mutant kind doing what they can. And I think, like you said, I think that's why Magik is one of those favorites that is held in such high regard.
Absolutely, 100%. She's always trying to do the right thing and do good, and I think prove to herself maybe outwardly that she's not this person she thinks she is. She's not the evil that she thinks she is. I think that comes from her own self perception. So I think she's really striving to show that she's a good person. I think one of the issues that I liked. It's a Bendis issue number 33, where she and Kitty go off to Monster Island to find a little mutant girl who, I don't know if you've ever read that one.
Oh, yeah, and they have a little moment there, I think, that you might be about to bring up, and you will probably recall better than I do, but it's where Kitty sort of isn't understanding the situation or what that child is going through, but Magik is like, I've been here before, and I know like how to handle this.
Right. Yeah. And Magic says, look, when the X-Men are fighting, she goes, I go off and try to find people who need help on her own, right? It's one of these things that she's been doing. She's just someone who wants to help kids, especially kids who've, are dealing with a lot of stuff since she obviously had to as well. So yeah, it's definitely one of those issues I enjoy, just because it does show this side of her. I think she tries to outrun her self perception of evil a lot, and I also have drawn to a lot of the issues. I think X-Men 231. There's been some others where people have said to us like, look, the fact that you're choosing to do good things is really a reflection upon who you are. You're not using these vast powers for bad. You're using them to help people, and so that trying to get her to see that that's who she really is. It's not what Belasco did to her. It's the deeds that she does daily.
And to jump to another like pivotal Illyana story, I'm curious what you think of Inferno, and I guess I should specify that it's the first Inferno now that we've had a second one, or maybe even a third one actually. There may be 3 Inferno storylines. Anyway, because, I know a lot of people say they don't like it because it's very messy, but I love the Inferno event, the original one, because it is so chaotic. And I think there's so much fun stuff going on in there. And I think, when the New Mutants are aligned with the Exterminators, all of that is super fun. And Illyana is like getting the armor and she has to make herself sacrifice. I love all of that. So I just want to know what you think of that storyline.
Yeah, and everything, I have really no problems. I mean, there's certainly you can always nitpick, and I think maybe that's what people are doing. But no, I absolutely agree with you. The story itself, it kind of makes sense in the arc. I mean, that's kind of where Magik was headed the whole time. She was headed toward this battle within herself. So for me, as a Magik person, a Magik fan, it makes sense that that's kind of where it ended up. She ended up kind of a hero. She's self-sacrificed. The only complaint I have is the fact that she stayed gone as long as she did. That's it.
Yeah, so I don't think I've explicitly read like what directly happens after the events of Inferno with like Magik and the New Mutants, maybe. But I guess I do know. I mean, in that she ends up being reverted to a child, and the thing I guess I do know is that eventually, she just gets killed by the legacy virus, and like, was that sort of just it for her?
Yeah, and I think what Louise Simonson had intended was that there was two. There was the Magik that we had been watching, and they come upon another version of the young child Magik. So they're on panel together. You see them together, and that in her idea was Magik was going to rescue this little girl, putting her in the armor so she wouldn't have to live that life, and that the Magik that we knew was still in limbo kicking butt. That was her perception. That's how she wrote it. That was her intention. And she said that in an interview, I think a year or two ago. That's what she intended. And she was shocked. She said that no one picked up on that. She like, she goes, I had them on page together. They were there. How could you not see that? For whatever reason, the creative teams who took over from that point on decided to go a different direction. I think it's when Cable gets brought in, it becomes X-Force essentially not long after. And then, yes, Magik or Illyana dies of the legacy virus. So, and then is gone for 14 years. So, yeah.
That is just like so wild to me, given her popularity too. I'm just like, I did not know she was one of those characters that they chose to bench for so long like that.
Truly crazy. And it was, and even when they brought her back, again, I understand what they had to do with the way they did it, but essentially bringing her back as a soulless character and who was, kind of evil, kind of not real nice. So
she did have kind of an evil arrow when she was brought back.
She was brought back. She did not have any of her soul. All of her soul was gone.
I think I've heard, because I think Pixie fans find this to be a bit of a controversial Magik moment, because this is where she tries to use the innocence of Pixie's soul to create a new soul sword, but that doesn't really work out.
Right. So she creates a soul dagger using Pixie's soul, and she which is a horrible thing, right? It's really awful. And then
I feel like that also doesn't really work, and I've not read it, so I shouldn't say anything definitive, but I feel like that doesn't work with the metaphor of Magik's trauma. If she had gone through that, it doesn't really make sense for her to be like, oh, I'm going to inflict that onto somebody else. Pixie, come here, give me that soul,
Right, and she does go on to feel remorseful, and she does eventually get back Pixie's soul gems or soul stones in the Zeb Wells run. But there are some people who say the current Magik is still not the original Magik. It's a shell. It's a shell that there's some who have that belief.
I know it's not exactly your point, but also, to be fair, some people will say that about every single one of the characters now because of the five and the resurrection protocols on Krakoa. So,
True. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think the magic from when she's brought back in 2007 up until Krakoa, just like a lot of characters, probably hit or miss depending on the writer, right? It's a lot of people complain about those times because of the inconsistent writing.
well, I've said something along the same lines before, but I just think it's part of being a comic book reader, especially when there's like such longevity to the storytelling that at some point somebody's going to get their hands on your favorite character and they're going to write them or they're going to characterize them in a way that you just completely think is the antithesis of what the character should be, and or the narrative is going to be something that you're like, this is just so wrong for the character. And as a fan, like I think you just got to take it and you got to
Yeah,
leave it.
I agree. I agree.
All right, well, if you want to now go through some of your key magic recommendations for somebody who might be interested in the character and doesn't know exactly where to start with her, I assume you're going to throw the wonderful Magic Limited series in there, as well as some of the early New Mutant stuff when she joins the team. Is that right?
Oh, 100%. So definitely the to just understand the trauma that she dealt with. So the Magic Mini is a must. If any for anyone who certainly questions who she is or why she may act the way she does, seeing the stuff she goes through is important. The New Mutants, starting with number 14, right on up. And if people want to certainly take it all the way up to Inferno, that'd be certainly awesome. But that's a lot. That's a lot.
I do think the whole run of that is really really good, and I know you said that some of the characters in there that are also part of the New Mutants specifically resonate with you, but I just want to say I'm a huge fan of all of them. I like all those characters so much. I think they're so fun, so great, and so different and unique from each other, and they each have their own like ideological growth throughout the series. And I just gotta say that I gotta rep the New Mutants because it's one of my favorite comic book runs of all
Yeah,
time.
so what's interesting is I found the series dull up until they brought in Illyana. I felt she just shook it up a little bit. I reading back through them, I've loved Danny. I don't remember liking Danny as much when I was first reading them, but I love Danny now. I think Roberto and Sam I like a lot more than I remember liking them. So I've definitely come to appreciate them a lot more. Karma, another one. So yeah, it took for me, I guess, some time to read back through those, and I really do appreciate them. But I was just referring to, when I was a 12-year-old reading them.
I totally get it. I just gotta say it because I mention it on this channel so often. Like the two X-Men spin-offs that I really, really do enjoy are New Mutants and Excalibur. I think those are both really, really fantastic, solid runs. But yeah, not this isn't the time right now to rave about Excalibur or the wonderful New Mutants run.
Oh, it's fantastic. And after that, honestly, I would recommend people hit the Bendis. That's just for me. I know the Bendis writing hit or miss for some people, but just strictly for Magic herself as a character, I like, especially those, I don't know, first I think 8 issues when they're kind of getting off the ground, and then she ends up turning to Doctor Strange for help. Big character growth for her, and so those, and then the current run. So I mean, the current New Mutants with Vita Ayala, just
Yeah,
phenomenal.
one of the best
Absolute
Krakoa comics.
love Vita's writing.
Yeah, they are so, so good. But thank you so much for joining me today, having this conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope that you did too. And I really appreciate it.
I had a blast, and I appreciate you allowing me to do this because I don't really get a chance to talk to people that often, other than on Twitter. So it's been an absolute treat. Thank you so much.
And also thank you to everybody who watched this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know who your favorite X-Men character is because I would love to hear from you. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.